Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. And welcome to the Calibration in a Regulatory Environment webinar. Today we will be discussing key regulatory requirements, including those from government agencies like the FDA, as well as other industry standards such as ISO 9000 and GAMP, Good Automated Manufacturing Practices. And we're going to talk about what the best practices are to help you comply with regulations and how you could possibly automate your calibration procedures to help maintain these vital records. All right, well, I am Katie Turner. I'm the marketing coordinator here at Beamex, Inc., and I currently handle the marketing operations for the U.S. and Canadian markets. Our host today will be Roy Tomalino, a Beamex Professional Services Engineer. He has been teaching calibration management for over 10 years and currently provides training support and technical support to our customers. Before I hand it off to Roy, for those of you who may not be familiar with Beamex, I'll tell you a little bit about us. We were founded over 30 years ago, back in 1975. That picture on the right there is our manufacturing headquarters and research and development facilities in Pietarsaari, Finland. Today we have more than 10,000 customers throughout the world and partners in over 80 countries. Our key markets include pharmaceutical, power and energy, oil and gas, chemical, petrochemical, as well as food and beverage. And our mission is, and always will be, to manufacture extremely high-quality calibration equipment, software, and systems for the process industries. All right, well, with that, I'd like to go ahead and welcome Mr. Roy Tomalino. Welcome, Roy.
Thank you, Katie, and welcome everybody to our webinar today. Today we'll be talking a little bit about calibration in a regulatory environment and what that means in real terms. Now, that's not to say we're going to cover every regulation in the book, but we're going to give some examples of regulation and how you can comply with that using a calibration package. So we'll start off with a couple industry trends. Regulatory compliance is one. We're all noticing not only do we have FDA regulations that are required in order to sell pharmaceuticals in the United States, but we have other regulations that are coming into play, like with EPA. You have greenhouse gases that have to be tracked, and you have to have some way to follow that within your database, OSHA requirements, etc. In addition to that, we do have smarter instrumentation. If we follow our instrumentation and we'll go back as far as the pneumatic days where a 3 to 15 psi pressure source essentially ran the entire process. Now, after that, we have 4 to 20 milliamp outputs. Beyond that, you have HARP instruments. We have instrumentation that starts becoming smart. And the next generation after that is field bus, where you have a full digital output, Profibus, Foundation Field Bus as an example. And with that, you have higher accuracies with the instrumentation itself. And when you have higher accuracy instrumentation, you need higher accuracy calibration equipment. So one of the standards is your calibrator has to be more accurate than what you're calibrating. So in other words, your standard has to be more accurate than what you're calibrating. The same is true with your calibrator itself. When you have that certified, you send it off to a larger lab. Whatever they're going to calibrate your calibrator with, usually a large benchtop model, will need to be more accurate than that calibrator. A 4 to 1 is the sweet spot, really, or better, 4 to 1 or better. So your standard is 4 times more accurate than what you're testing. Technology demands, we're seeing technology go even higher. We're looking at multivariable instrumentation, where instead of just a pressure transmitter or a temperature transmitter, you have a device that does those values and even more. I'm thinking of a flow transmitter as an example, where it's calculating a gauge pressure, a differential pressure, a temperature, etc. And using that, you have to have a multifunction calibrator, and then you have to have a communicator, or in the case of our MC6, you have the multifunction calibrator and the communicator all in one device. Let's look at some definitions regarding calibration. The definition of calibration is the set of operations which establish under specified conditions the relationship between values indicated by a measuring instrument or measuring system, or values represented by a material measure, and the corresponding known values of a reference standard. So validation is the action of providing, in accordance with the principles of good manufacturing practices, GMP, that any procedure, process, equipment, material, activity, or system actually leads to the expected results. So does it actually do what it says it's going to do? And qualification, the action of proving that any equipment works correctly and actually leads to the expected results. The word validation is sometimes widened to incorporate the concept of qualification. Responsibilities. In a regulatory environment, you have responsibilities that need an owner. If there's no owner, then it doesn't get addressed. So let's look at process owners. Process owners should identify the critical parameters, the process variables, and to derive acceptable limits. You need to know how to set the testing or what it should be aimed at as far as the input and the output, etc. So the quality assurance group, they are supposed to verify that limits are acceptable, that they are true, and to ensure that those parameters meet regulatory compliance. So it's your QA group that should direct you with what you need to start tracking from a regulatory perspective. I can't answer all those questions on what you should be tracking, but I can take those answers and then reverse engineer it to allow you to start tracking those items. So I'll show you using a calibration software how to utilize a feature like electronic signature or audit trail, what that actually looks like. And then engineering. They have a responsibility to propose use of suitable instrumentation and assess whether the instruments themselves are fit for purpose. The GAMP Forum itself was established in 1991 to help promote the understanding of how computer systems validation should be carried out in the pharmaceutical industry. Calibration is an essential element in ensuring compliance in the pharmaceutical industry. To ensure success, calibration should be managed effectively by appropriately qualified personnel with good technical knowledge and practical understanding. If neglected, calibration is capable of compromising both production and plant safety and even increasing costs. Now, I mentioned GAMP and it has its origins in the pharmaceutical industry. That doesn't mean that everything we're talking about is pharma. This can be easily applied to chemical companies, to food and bev, anywhere where you have regulations that you need to track and to follow. Everybody's probably familiar with ISO standards like ISO 9000. ISO standards are quality-based systems where you write down documentation or procedures in how you're going to accomplish a certain goal or an objective, and then you make sure you do it that way. So you write down what you're going to do, and then you do what you said. That's essentially what ISO is. ISO 17025 simply adds competence to the standards, to the mix. So ISO is voluntary. Regulatory requirements are mandatory. So that's the biggest difference here. And regulations can come from CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, the FDA, EPA, OSHA, EMEA, and then other state agencies. So I've got a number of examples here, but just to say that it's not just about pharma with this discussion. One thing that I will add, regulatory requirements normally bring about audits. And an ISO audit does require that you hire an outside firm. Oftentimes you can have an inside audit where they check your processes and procedures, your documentation. But to actually get the certification, you have to have a third-party audit. And I'll just give an example. I was training a gentleman from a chemical plant in the southeast U.S., and he wasn't real happy about getting trained, about learning about the calibration software, about learning about the hardware. He viewed it as a necessary evil. I have to do this because I'm replacing a guy. His job was calibration, and I have to learn how to do this software. So where I'm going with this is 2 weeks after I trained him, he called me up to thank me. And I've never had anybody call up and thank me for this, but he had just gotten audited. The auditor was looking over the back of his shoulder, telling him, okay, let me look at this tag. You bring up the tag, let me see the last test results. Easy. You bring that up, shows you the test results. Show me calibrator that was used to calibrate this. So you just click over here, and it shows you. Show me where that calibrator was certified. So you click here, and that shows you what the document number was of the calibration lab that did the certification on your calibrator, which calibrated your tag, so you can follow that chain all the way from your tag all the way back up to the NIST standards. As odd as it sounds, I got a phone call saying thank you after a guy got audited because he was only over his shoulder about 5 minutes and he went off to somebody else. So there really is a benefit to having a package, to having a tool for tracking this information electronically. If you don't have this, then you're off digging in file drawers, and we all know what that's like. You've got one room, and it is a full line of file drawers almost as far as the eye can see, and you need to figure out where you're going to check your records. Once you get that, then you're off to the next file drawer for the next information. So just a quick example there. Now, I've got an example here of pharma regulations because it's the strictest, and this gives the fullest list that we have to go from. Now, I know that a number of you are in different industries. We have pulp and paper, we do have chemical, we have food and bev. So what your list is going to be a lot shorter. So that's a good thing, right? But I will go through these lists for pharma, and you can just rest assured that yours will be smaller. But in pharma, you have a quality system, the QS. Now, quality system regulation requires that each manufacturer develop, conduct, control, monitor production processes to ensure that the end device conforms to its specs. Now, all equipment used to manufacture a device shall be appropriately designed, constructed, placed, installed to facilitate maintenance, adjustment, cleaning, and use. So not only does it have to be fit for purpose, but you have to be able to get into it and test it, check it, clean it. The degree of maintenance on equipment and the frequency of calibration of measuring equipment will depend upon the type of equipment, frequency of use, and importance in the manufacturing process. Where deviations from device specs could occur as a result of manufacturing processes, the manufacturer shall establish and maintain process control procedures. So that's from the QS regulation. So on the list there, we've got maintain calibration records, written approved procedures. So the procedures are the how are we going to calibrate this. Everyone has to be in agreement on that. You can't send your techs out and not tell them exactly what the procedure is for calibrating what they're about to do. Each instrument at the plant must have a master history record, a unique ID. And I'll give you examples of this, what it looks like. It's not really as complicated as it sounds. It's my job to help demystify some of this jargon for you, and showing you the software I'm about to show you will help demystify it. Safety instruments should be physically tagged. There must be a calibration period established, as well as error limits. They must be traceable to both national and international standards, if possible. And standards must be more accurate than the required accuracy of the equipment being calibrated. A couple more, the personnel must be properly trained and with documented evidence. I'll show you how to do that too. Documented change management system also must be implemented. This is called change management. In some cases it's called an audit trail, but it's the same thing. And then implemented in conjunction with the following regs. You have 21 CFR Part 211, which is current good manufacturing practice for finished pharmaceuticals. And then 21 CFR Part 11, that's electronic records or electronic signatures. That one transfers to all industries, the 21 CFR Part 11. So key regulatory requirements. Now, again, I have examples here in the pharma industry, but that's just because it's the most complete. Nuclear would be up there as well. So we'll walk through some of these. So each instrument should have a permanent master history record. What does that look like? Well, I'm showing an example. You could use any calibration documentation software that supports audit trail, electronic signature, multifunction documenting calibrators. You can find anyone, anywhere that you can use. And okay, the list is going to be pretty short. But in this example, we're using a Beamex software package called CMX. So this is CMX software. This is how we load and unload our documenting calibrators. This tracks all of our tags. It keeps track of that. So I'm not going to focus on CMX itself, but I'm using a documenting software to comply with all these regulations. So this is where we're going to take some of the mystery out of all of these terms. So we need a master history record. This does that. On the left-hand side, we have a listing of all of our tags. They're listed alphabetically. Each tag has a function, which means what is it? Is it a switch? Is it a transmitter? It also has a procedure. So we can define a procedure for every tag. It doesn't have to be complicated. The procedure itself is how are we going to test it? Remember that the function is the what, the procedure is how do we test it. Let's say that this is a temperature transmitter. It's 0 to 100 degrees centigrade. That's what it is. It's an RTD. And how we're going to test it would be a 5 up down test strategy. We want it to be within a quarter of a degree, plus or minus a quarter of a degree centigrade. So that's the procedure. That's the how. Now, also within the software, it keeps track of every test result that you've ever done with this. So we're looking at an example of one test result. We see an as found that is a green color there. That one actually failed. The red is our as left. The as left passed, which we can see on the screen. There's also another option, which is a history trend. A history trend allows us to look at every single one of those tests on a timeline. So we can see the trending if the transmitter itself is drifting downwards, or maybe it's drifting upwards, or maybe every time we send a tech, it has to be trimmed and adjusted because it's out of tolerance every single time. And if it's out of tolerance, that tells you something. That tells you that possibly it's not fit for purpose. Maybe that tag is not accurate enough. Maybe you need to switch to a different model. Maybe it's even bigger than that. Maybe the manufacturer of that transmitter you're using, maybe they don't have tight enough tolerances, and you need to go to someone else. That history trend is what will give you that data. So back to our list, we just looked at a master history record. So the next thing we need is an assigned number. So in this case, this is just a tag number. Every tag needs to be unique. And you know what? You get to pick what they are. You have some flexibility in that. In some cases, if you're using an MMS system like SAP or Maximo, you may already have a predefined number for that area. And if that's the case, you just use that number here in the database as your tag ID. No big deal. The calibration method should be defined by an approved procedure. Calibration frequency and process limits should be defined for each instrument. So the frequency and the process limits, that's the error allowed, and the due date is what that refers to. So maybe this transmitter, you have it set for an annual testing cycle. As soon as I test it, it changes the due date to 1 year from today, if I tested it today. Now, if this thing is failing every time our tech goes out to calibrate it, then that means we have to make that interval shorter. So if you fail an as-found test, a good calibration rule of thumb is to cut the interval in half. So if it was 12 months, your next calibration should occur 6 months from now. So you can check that out. And then if you've had 3 successful calibrations, 3 successful meaning that the as-found passed and no adjustment was required, then you can expand out that interval again. So you can take it from the 6 months and move it back out to the 1 year that you had it previously. Now, number 5, there should be a means of readily determining the calibration status of each instrument. Now, what does that mean? Well, if we go back, click on the tag, click on the test results, it tells us in plain English it passed. It gives us a date of when it happened, and in this case, a gentleman named John Smith did the test. Let me hop back. Number 6, calibration records should be maintained. Well, that's already happening here. There's no extra work whatsoever for this to occur. The calibration records are stored automatically. You know, on this topic, I'll give one more example. A large beverage manufacturer, we'll say that, so this is a real company, uses calibration software to save money. So it's not just about coming in line with federal regulations or other regulatory agencies. A calibration software package and documenting calibrator can actually save you time and money. Here's the calculation that they did. They had a number of sites across, well, actually around the world, focusing on 10 of those sites. Each of them had about 5,000 tags or 5,000 calibratable assets. They figured, just to be on the conservative side, they would, for their calculations, use 1,000 tags per site, and they picked 10 sites. There are far more than that, but just for purposes of their example. So 1,000 tags, figured on an annual basis. They determined that using the documenting software and a documenting calibrator, they were able to cut their technician time or calibration time in half. So all you need to know is how much your calibration techs, how much their expenses are per hour, and you can cut that in half for a known value. So if you have 1,000 tags and the average time is 2 hours per calibration, you can do the math. If you cut that in half, then all of a sudden those 1,000 tags now take an hour instead of 2 hours. And the number, what it saved them was $100,000 per site, just looking at 1,000 tags per year. So with 10 sites, they saved $1 million a year just for those first 10 sites, looking at only 1,000 tags. So again, they were trying to be conservative, but that's another reason for using documenting calibration software. You don't have to look at this as just a necessary evil. This actually can help you. So to continue along, and again, these are lists under the pharma code, but all electronic systems used for calibration management, which affects products for supply to the U.S., must comply with the FDA 21 CFR Part 11. That's the electronic records and electronic signatures. Now, you don't have to be regulated by the FDA to take advantage of electronic signatures. This is a feature you can have regardless of what industry you're in. But what they thought about this was they were concerned with the start of using electronic data storage. They were concerned about being able to manipulate that data. One way to think about it is pencil whipping. So you can go in there and change a field, do whatever you want to. So to counter that, this 21 CFR Part 11 puts in walls and restrictions. So one of those is electronic signature. One of those is security. You have to be able to lock out certain users with limited rights, limited abilities. And the software does that. So you're able to have a technician that can load a calibrator, they can create a test result, but they can't change the function, or they can't change the setup information. For example, 0 to 100 degrees, they can't change it from 20 to 100. Or change the error allowed to a larger number so the test will pass instead of fail. So that's the security piece. Another part of this is audit trail. You need to be able to look at history, see what changes have been made, who made the change, when it happened, what the old value was, what the new value is, and then have a review of that data as well. So that's 21 CFR Part 11, very briefly. So number 8, calibration measuring standards should be more accurate than the required accuracy of the instrument that's being used. That's a lot of words to say. Make your calibrator, make sure it's more accurate than what you're testing. So here we're seeing an example in the software that shows the calibrators. It shows what the accuracies are of the calibrator itself, which from that you can determine what the uncertainties are at any given value. One thing I'll say as far as the calibrators themselves, you don't have to look at this as a calibrator that you can hold in your hand. A calibrator is simply a standard. A standard is something that you verify a known quantity against something else. So a standard can also be a nitrogen bottle. It can be an O2 bottle. It can be a pH buffer solution. That can be your standard that you can track in the software. Maybe you have buffer solutions of 4, 7, and 10 pH, and you have serial numbers on those bottles. They have expiration dates. You're able to track those. So that's another value of having a calibration software that can track that information. Number 9, each measuring standard should be traceable to a nationally or internationally recognized standard where one exists. So here we're showing you the test result itself, and the part in red is the calibrator and the module of that calibrator that's used for the input as well as the output. Now it doesn't show on this screen, but you can go back to the calibration screen itself where the calibrators are, and you can see the serial number of that calibrator, the due date. There's also a field to trace to put in the traceability document that you get from the lab. So let's say you send your MC6 off to Beamex to be certified. You get that document number, and that document number is what links your calibrator up to the calibration lab. And the calibration lab has a documentation to trace it up to the national standards. So that's your link. Number 10, all instruments used should be fit for purpose. Now this seems obvious, but in this example we're showing the calibrator itself, and we're showing what the low limit, the upper limit, the operating temperatures, the spec temperatures that they should be operating in. And we also have that same information for the tags themselves. This is actually referring to the calibrator. But there's that same operating information with each instrument that you have inside the database, so you can track all of that. So number 11, there should be documented evidence. The personnel involved in the calibration process have been trained and are competent. Let's take a look. So within the software, we have a list of users. Each of those users has their own account, and within that account we have notes. So we can just type in here when they've been trained. So here's an example of Tim, the technician, who's been trained a couple weeks ago, actually, on CMX software and the MC6 calibrator. So we can see that this individual has been trained. And for further proof, we have a Beamex calibration certificate linked directly into his security account right in the software. So you can see that down below. Now, it could be a PDF file. In this case, I have a text file that this is linked to, and this file is literally stored within the calibration software database. So this is how I prove to somebody that this individual has been trained, and then I've got their calibration certificate as well. If I've got an auditor sitting over my shoulder, I just click on open, it brings up that certificate, and I can prove it to them right there. And then number 12, a documented change management system should be established. So here's an example within our CMX software of a change management, the feature. Down below, we can see what it looks like for a draft change. So down at the bottom, we've got Peter Parker, the calibration technician. That's quite a coincidence that that tech is named Peter Parker. Okay, so a change was made. And then we can also see that a calibration supervisor, wait a minute, his name is Clark Kent. Is that? Huh. So the calibration supervisor approved that change. So that's the electronic signature aspect. Let me do this. I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like I've got a CMX software open up in front of me here. I've got a tag. This happens to be the tag number 330PT0801. So up across the top, here's my calibration history. I can see that it passed, the as left, and if I go all the way to the bottom, I can see that this was calibrated by Tim the technician. Now I'm logged in as a supervisor, and if I wanted to sign this electronically, I just click the sign button, and I choose a status. The status, you get to pick what all these are. Maybe you've got a calibration that failed the as found, and it was so far out that your entire process is in jeopardy, that whatever you're producing, maybe it's a quality issue, maybe everything you're producing now is might end up going right in the garbage bin, or maybe it's a safety issue, that you're making some consumable and you might be subject to a recall. So in that case, you might be putting this attention to the QA, the quality department. I can put it attention to the maintenance group that they need to get out there and fix this. But this actually passed, so there was nothing exciting about this. I'm putting attention not required. I'm clicking the checkbox to approve this thing, and now I'll type in my password, and I'll hit OK. So what we just saw is a live electronic signature. So I've just approved this test result, so it's been blessed by me if you want to look at it that way. And it's part of the record. Now within the software, if I go up to Tools and Audit Trail, we can take a look. Let me make this a little bigger. This is our change management area. We happen to call it Audit Trail. You can refer to it any way you like. And if we look at the top, it gives us the most recent occurrences at the top. And we can see that Roy Tomalino created an electronic signature on this tag. And we can also see more information. As for example, that Sammy Koskinen had logged out and that I had logged in. This shows you everything that's happening in the background in the database. So anytime a field has been changed, again, this is called Audit Trail or change management. And you don't need to be in the pharmaceutical industry to take advantage of an audit trail or to realize its usefulness. In some cases, an audit trail might be handy for you if somewhere along the line the setup parameters on a pressure switch or a temperature transmitter, somewhere along the line the setup values changed, and you wanted to find out, well, when exactly did that change? You could go right in the audit trail, find that tag, and see that, oh, I see, it changed here 6 months ago, and Tim the technician had requested a change and that another supervisor had made the change. So this is audit trail or change management. And there's also another ability to review or show this audit trail as having been reviewed. We could specify a certain date range, maybe everything in the first quarter. Let me do this. I'll go ahead and edit this, and I'll say reviewed and save. So now that thing has been reviewed. And I have this thing defaulting to display only items that have not been reviewed. If I change it to reviewed, then I get to see everything that has been reviewed inside the audit trail. Or I can show both. That's easy too. So I'm going to cancel out of the audit trail. And so again, we're discussing calibration in a regulatory environment. And I had a lot of pharma examples, but please know that this isn't just about pharma. Pharma just happens to have a lot of requirements, and it's easy to pull from that list. So if you do have regulations within the EPA, maybe you're monitoring greenhouse gas emissions, one way that you can do that is you have the ability to choose your own checkboxes. So I know a specific refinery has added a couple checkboxes to allow them to monitor these greenhouse gases easier. They can do searches on them. So if I were to change this checkbox, free check number 1, let me just change this right here. I'll make this checkbox. I'll call this EPA. And it doesn't really matter what it's called here. The point is that you can utilize this to, I just need to close this and reopen the window. So now my checkbox on the bottom says EPA. And I can do searches on this. I can click on my filter, and I'll say, you know what, just show me every tag that I have that has the EPA checkbox selected. So maybe these are all the tags that are maybe not safety critical, but greenhouse gas critical, if you want to call it that. So on the left-hand side, I can see that I have 5 tags that have that checkbox selected. And I've got 5 checkboxes to work with that I can customize, and I also have 5 text fields that I can customize and do whatever I want to with. So I'll double-click this filter just so I get all of my tags back up. So that's a quick example on looking at the electronic signature and looking at audit trail. You know your business better than I do. But as far as calibrating in a regulatory environment, you may have some questions that we might be able to help you out or determine how to use calibration software to fill those needs and to answer those requirements. I have a few more slides, and then we'll go ahead and see if we have any questions on this. So one of the requirements is the data must be accessed in human-readable form. As silly as this sounds, this was brought out. So, and that's human-readable to me. That's good. Now, I mentioned restricting use of system functions. So in this case, we can limit a certain group or even an individual to having very specific rights. And we can see, can they view the audit trail? That's near the top. Audit trail, can they modify it? Can they view it? Can they maintain descriptions? So it's simply a checkbox to give them that right or take it away. Electronic signature is an option within the software, and I've showed you what that looks like. And here's what it looks like to sign that. It's simply your user ID and password. That's the electronic signature portion. And the last window here is, I didn't have that enabled, but you can require that the person making the change or signing gives a description of what they're doing. I happen to have that off. And then identify changes to an electronic record. We looked at that already, looking at the audit trail or the change management, whichever word you like to use there. So with that, we've actually reached all of our objectives here on calibration in a regulatory environment. Again, this was just designed to be a 35,000-foot view. It's not designed to go over every regulation, but to show you how to use the tools to accomplish some of these regs and the documentation thereof. So, Katie, do we have any questions?
Hi, Roy. Thank you for the presentation. Very informative. I don't see any questions yet. If you have questions that do come up later on, you can give us a call at 800-888-9892 or email us at beamex.inc. That's beamex.inc@beamex.com. We do have a white paper available on this topic. It's called Calibration in a Regulatory Environment, and also a more in-depth article available in the second edition of Ultimate Calibration, which is a book that's put out by Beamex with some topics covering calibration, and it does outline many of the regulations that are in place by the FDA and also some European regulations as well. You can download both of those directly from the Beamex website, and that's www.beamex.com. or feel free to email us or give us a call. We'll be happy to send you a copy of either of those. We want to thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you once again to Roy for the presentation, and have a great week.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.